Good morning, grade fours, and welcome to Natural Science with me, Miss Quinn. I hope that you're ready to learn and continue on our journey through the solar system, because today we are going to explore the moon. So remember throughout this lesson that if you've got any questions, remember to email them to grade4@worksheetcloud.com. And the joke for today, which I actually love, I think it's got to be one of my favorites, is: what did the baby corn say to the mama corn? What did the baby corn say to the mama corn? Where is popcorn? Get it? So sometimes the pop would be dad. Many people call their dad Pop. So where is popcorn? I loved it. So I used to actually call my grandfather Pop. But I know that some people call their dads Pop as well. So that's why I quite enjoyed it. If you didn't, don't worry. Right. Okay. So we have a very exciting lesson planned today. And the reason why it is so exciting is because we are going to take a journey to the moon, and we're going to learn about the moon. So over the next couple of lessons, we're going to focus a little bit focus on the moon. And what is awesome about this lesson in particular is because instead of me starting off this moon section and talking about the characteristics of the moon or the moon in relation to the earth, we're going to do a little bit of a history lesson today, where we're going to look at the journey to the moon and how the first people that landed on the moon and what their names were. Okay, so we have in 1969, we have on July the 18th, we have these three men. Their names were Edwin Buzz Aldrin, Neil Armstrong, and Michael Collins. And these three astronauts in 1969, they left Earth in a in a rocket. And this rocket was called Apollo 11. Okay, so we are going to learn more about what happened, and it's going to be quite exciting today. So you just sit back, relax, and just enjoy the lesson. So we have these three astronauts, and they are very well known throughout our history within Earth, because these three, Edwin, his nickname was Buzz, so you'd always hear Buzz Aldrin, but his name was Edwin Aldrin, Neil Armstrong, and Michael Collins. Those were the three astronauts that left Earth on July 18th, and their destination was the moon. The name of the rocket was called Apollo 11. So here is a picture of the rocket, and these are real life pictures. So this is the rocket that is about to leave the Earth. Now this rocket, it says the total height of the Saturn V rocket, okay, plus the payload. So when we talk about the payload, we talk about all the fuel and all the extras that this rocket needed. So the height of this rocket was 110 meters. And how heavy this particular rocket was, it weighed 3 million kilograms. Okay, now it's very, very heavy, and most of it was actually the fuel. So this is the rocket. Look how beautiful the sky is looking. And this was 1969. Right, 90% of the mass. So as I mentioned before, that 90% of the mass was actually the fuel and the actual rocket. And what remained was the command module, the lunar module, and the service module. So what that means is that if you have a look at the size or the length of this particular rocket, most of the fuel takes up 90% of how heavy this rocket is. The only thing that is left are these three. When we say a module, think of it like a part of the little rocket, where we have a command module where all the commands are, a lunar module, and that particular module or that part of the rocket, specifically that specific part of that rocket went to the moon. Remember, we are now talking about 1969. I wasn't alive then, and you definitely were not alive then. So it was a very long time ago. And then there was a part of a rocket which is called the service module, or the service part of the rocket. So the three main parts of the rocket was called the command module, the command part. So you can imagine all the commands were there. The lunar module, where this specific part broke off and went specifically to the moon. And then we have this service module. Okay, and we're going to look at those. So here's another picture of our rocket, of the rocket that left Earth. Just have a look at the blast. So it says here that during the first stage of the flight, the rocket burns 15 tons of fuel every second. That is 15,000 kilograms of fuel every second. So it is, you can imagine the amount of fuel that this rocket needed in order to just blast off and to try and go through the Earth's atmosphere and leave Earth. So rockets require thousands and thousands, or should I say tons and tons of fuel, because every single second that passes, 15 tons of that fuel is burnt. Right, so now we can understand why 90% of the mass of the rocket was the fuel, because it just needed so much fuel. Right, so the exhaust gases that leave the rocket, so you can see all of this here, all these flames, these are actually all the exhaust gases, like from a car. So when we put petrol in a car and the petrol then goes through our engine, there is an exhaust, all the fumes that come out of our car. Same thing with a rocket, where the exhaust gases leave the rocket at over 15,000 kilometers per hour, and they extend for almost half a kilometer. So all of this, you can see that it looks like a big flame. These are all the exhaust gases, just like from the exhaust of a car. And how long it is? It stretches for almost half a kilometer. So half a kilometer is 500 meters. Okay, and it leaves the rocket at 15,000 kilometers per hour. So it's very fast, very, very quick. Okay, so after 8 minutes, the particular rocket, it reaches a speed of over 25,000 kilometers per hour, and it escapes the Earth's surface. Or should I say the Earth's atmosphere. And so that's what happened with this rocket. Remember, this lesson, I'm talking about facts. These are the facts that happened in 1969 when the rocket left Earth. All right, so these are the proper facts. Okay, and so according to NASA, now the cost of this particular project, the final cost of Project Apollo was, and you saw that, let me just go back one, just to sort of show you the cost again. Okay, so we saw that it reached, after 8 minutes, it escaped the Earth's gravity and it left our atmosphere. Okay, then the cost of the project, for some of you, it cost so much money. So as you can just well imagine how much fuel was needed for the project. So it cost $25 billion in 1969. Right, so that is a lot of money for this whole project, for the moon, for the rocket to travel to the moon. To send these 3 men to the moon, although Michael Collins didn't land on it, took a workforce of almost 500,000 people. Right, and then 75 hours later, the rocket reaches the moon. Hasn't landed just yet, but it reaches the moon. So you can imagine 500,000 people. That's how many people it took to actually put this rocket, this whole project together, from the people working at the control center, to the engineers, to the scientists, to the astronauts, to the 500,000 people. So you can just imagine how much work was put into this rocket, how much work was put into this project to send these 3 astronauts to the moon, right? So this is quite important, because when that rocket left the Earth, it took 75 hours to reach the moon. Okay, so have a look over here. So this is what we have left. So the lunar module separates from the command and service module and makes its descent to the moon. So did you see that massive part of the rocket that we saw earlier that was just fuel? The moment that rocket then escaped Earth's gravity and went past the atmosphere. That fuel part then sort of left the rocket, and then this is what was left of Apollo 11. Okay, so this is what was left. And you can see what was left were those 3 parts of the rocket, okay, which was, remember what I said was quite interesting. So we have the command and service modules, that's over here. And then this section over here, and you can see its little feet. This part here is called the lunar module. So what happens is this lunar module, so this lunar part, lunar is another word to describe the moon. And so this part over here is specifically designed to break away from the command and service for now, and it's going to break away and it's going to go directly to the moon. So you see it broke away and it then travels to the moon. The rockets fired to slow down the lunar module on its descent to the moon's surface. So you can see that as it was coming down, it needed to fire a little bit of fuel to control it coming down, because remember, there's no gravity in space. And so these little rockets, or this lunar module, could have been anywhere, and so it needed that little bit of fuel to fire it, to sort of control it and to bring it down to the moon. Right, so meanwhile, so while that lunar module is there on the planets, while that lunar module is there on the moon, sorry, I'm getting my words all mixed up, the command and service modules orbit the moon, and Michael Collins was the one astronaut. He stayed behind, and Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong, they are the ones that went on the lunar module that went to the moon itself. Okay, so this is what was left behind, and he was just waiting here, waiting for the other 2. Okay. Meanwhile, the command and service modules orbit the moon, and Michael Collins was still on board. So you see he was just chilling, taking his time. Okay. So here is a series of pictures that as the lunar module reached the moon, 2 hours later, it then landed on the surface of the moon. So once it detached and it then found its way to the moon, it took 2 hours when it detached from the service and the command part of that, the little rocket. It detached and then made its way to the moon and eventually landed on the moon. Okay, very cool. And so Neil Armstrong is the very first man on the moon. He descended, so he goes down, he descended from the lunar module. He then made his way down the steps and he put his first foot on the moon. And a very famous quote, his very famous words, he said, "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." And so those are the words that he actually said, and those words are very famous today. If you research a little bit about what Neil Armstrong said, that is what he said when he took the very first step on the moon. He was the very first man in our history for anyone to ever venture and land on the moon. So again, one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Okay. 22 hours later, Armstrong and Aldrin, so those 2 that were standing in the accommodation section, they blasted off from the lunar module's landing gear. Okay, so they did what they needed to do. They then blasted off the moon and they started to make their way back to Michael Collins, who was sitting there waiting for them in the command and service module, right? So he's busy waiting here. And the other little part of the rocket that was on the moon with Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, they then left the moon. They've come back to the command and service module to join together so that they can then make their way back to Earth. So their mission so far was successful. They made it to the moon. They took a step on the moon, which was amazing. They made history throughout our history. They are very famously known for landing on the moon, or being the first people to land on the moon. And so they did what they needed to do. They're now going back to Michael Collins, and now they need to make their way safely back to Earth. Okay, and so once in orbit, in Earth's orbit, and it took 7 days later, the command module then separates itself from the service module, right? So now the command and service module, they then separate from each other. what happens? Then it then re-enters the Earth's atmosphere at 40,000 kilometers per hour. Right, and once it enters, you can see that parachutes then are deployed to try and slow it down, because it was going really, really fast, and slowed it down very slow to 20 kilometers per hour before it hit the Pacific Ocean. So it came into our Earth's atmosphere. It was very, very quick. Parachutes shot out to try and slow it down, and then it landed in the Indian Ocean. So here is a picture to show that the astronauts were picked up by helicopters, taken to a nearby ship, and then they were put in quarantine for 3 days. So just like some people have been in quarantine during our sort of lockdown, these astronauts were put in quarantine for 3 days. And because it was important for them, they were just in space. Two of them were on the moon, so they just wanted to check their body levels, their temperature, to make sure that they were okay and that everything was functioning perfectly. Okay, now the last thing that I want to end off with is, this is a quote by another astronaut called William Anders, and he was on a separate mission to this particular mission. And this quote was a beautiful quote. He said, "We came all this way to explore the moon, but the most important thing is that we discovered the Earth." And I think that is such a beautiful way of looking at the perspective of our planet and of Earth itself. So he's saying, yes, we left Earth to go and explore the moon, but when we got to the moon, we actually turned around, we looked at Earth, and we just saw Earth in its glory and its beauty. And they discovered Earth and how magnificent Earth actually is. So, boys and girls, I really hope that you enjoyed that lesson. I know it was a little bit of a history lesson, but I think it is important to know the history of the moon, to know the history of the first people that landed on the moon. And I thought it was a really cool way to introduce the next couple of lessons that is going to be on the moon. So remember, if you want to go back or rewatch the video, I know that you have definitely learned something new today. So, because there are some things that I learned for the first time as well. So thank you very much for joining me today. I hope you have a marvelous day going forward, and I shall see you next time. From me, Miss Kun, Hakuna Matata, and remember, be kind to one another. Bye.